do, 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 do. What the fuck am I doing? That's got no relevance to that whatsoever. I'm just being a fucking idiot. I mean, I don't know what I would do if I had a script, because I know I wouldn't follow it. That's the thing. But it's pointless. The script is essentially just like, you know, the screens, the slides, like introduce this slide tells me to introduce the series and the item, and then it'll be like each item, each overclock, and it'll tell me about it so I know what to say, and then there'll be three of those, and then the end screen so I know to end it. It's like it should just play automatically, and then I can just watch it and know exactly what to say. Unfortunately, I'm actually in complete control and I have to move it along manually, which means I often end up spending far too long on any given slide. And I'm realising now that this doesn't really have any particular relevance to the episode itself, more so to the general series and me having a crisis over it, as it would happen. That's what it seems like it's happening anyway. Either way, welcome back to the Overclock Workshop. This week we're taking a look at Gunner's Sticky Grenade, because obviously, you know, it's got a pretty limited selection of overclocks as it is. It's got a pretty limited selection of upgrades as well. I thought it'd be nice if we could give it some more. You know, I don't even feel like entertaining that bit. Obviously, grenades don't have overclocks and don't have upgrades. So, as you probably know by now, this series is really just me trying to find ways to improve or new mechanics to add to these things, or just pure hypotheticals in the case that they might have upgrades or overclocks. It's a sort of me. The series has sort of become a combination of being purely hypothetical, but also me trying to bring it away from being hypothetical. And I suppose if I had a bit more foresight, I would have known when making these that they were purely hypothetical. It's not like there was ever any chance of grenade overclocks being a thing. But I'm doing this regardless. I think a couple of these, maybe not the unstable as much, would be pretty interesting. I think the balance probably makes them more sense as its own grenade. In fact, that's probably not a bad way to look at a lot of the more extreme ones in this series, just in general, particularly the grenades. But that's sort of how I see the point of grenade overclocks. If they was to ever add them, it would actually be a way of fleshing out the grenade variety substantially. You know, I feel like that doesn't happen with weapon overclocks as much. Definitely want more weapon overclocks. It will help freshen up the older weapons. I feel like at this point they kind of need that. We are kind of due a dump of overclocks for all the pre-existing weapons, which can include Gen 3. But overclocks don't make the weapons that far from themselves in most cases. You know, some of them, honestly, the most extreme ones would be something like plasma buster missiles, and plasma buster missiles is ass, so. But in the case of grenades, I feel like overclocks should be used to change them a lot, and really make it feel like you have a choice of multiple different types of the same grenade, rather than changing that grenade, you know? So I'm always offering, particularly with the balance and the unstable, new versions of the sticky grenade rather than just upgrades for it. The first one, however, being a clean, is obviously much more close to an upgrade, or in this case, even potentially something that should be added to it, which is Alarm Clock. Now, this sort of sprung up from the HE grenade having this new cooking mechanic. I suppose it's not that new anymore. And this sort of sprung up from that, and I thought, how could that be translated onto something that it wouldn't make sense for you to be able to cook, right? Because the sticky grenade, its fuse only starts when it hits a surface, and obviously it has a very short fuse, but it doesn't explode before hitting a surface because it's a sticky grenade. It has to stick to something, and then after a very short time, it will explode. I thought, how could we introduce some kind of cooking mechanic? And that's where Alarm Clock came from, where you could hold a sticky grenade in your hand to make it become dormant. And I thought, you know, how do we do something like this? Well, you would need to sort of introduce a new mechanic where it could enter a different mode of itself if you hold it in your hand for long enough. You know, you could even have the cooking meter like you have on the HE grenade, but once it goes down, it actually renders the grenade dormant instead. And obviously, you would eliminate this effect by switching out of your weapon. It's absolutely fine. But once it becomes dormant, you're now locked into that dormant grenade unless you switch out. So when you throw it, you have to actually press RB again to detonate it. And basically, it's a way of introducing remote detonation, which I think is something the sticky grenade could really benefit from. I suppose there's an unfortunate side of it where there's not really much about the sticky grenade that could make it a lot better. It's always going to be a fairly weak grenade, and something like remote destination isn't going to give it like a massive amount of pizzazz, I suppose. It's not really going to raise it that much. If you could say throw multiple of them out at the same time, then I think it would be a bit of a different story. But I don't see that being balanced, though. That's the thing. Still, I think perhaps giving people more control over their sticky grenades might be a way to push them up a little bit. You know, especially in contrast to, I'd say, all of the other grenades, all the other gunner grenades, which exert a incredible amount of uncontrollability. They're all very random and sporadic and uncontrollable. Even the lead burster, which fires in like a rigid pattern, because obviously it's quite an unstable thing to use given the friendly fire associated. But this would give you an exceptional amount of control over your grenade, and I suppose the main benefit would be attaching it to an enemy and making sure it's in a good place, a very densely packed group of enemies. You could do the same by leading enemies over a sticky grenade that you put on the floor. You could even attach it to yourself. I hope. You could throw it up in the air and it'll land on you. And then as a gunner, obviously, you're not going to take too much damage from that. Or you could even attach it to your teammates, which would be pretty mean. Or you could attach it to a Steve, which would be taking the Trojan Grunt idea to not a new level, just a different level, I suppose. Anyway, that's alarm clock. In terms of implementation, I suppose it would have to be a I would actually like to propose the question whether or not you think it would work as just being added to the base grenade, because it might be a somewhat redundant upgrade. I sort of see grenades getting upgrades as either two options. You either get one tier of upgrades, or you get 3 overclocks. And this could work as either a clean overclock or just a single upgrade, and you sort of pick between different upgrades that do sort of a few weird little things. But it could also be a base mechanic. This one really could be all three, and that's why it sort of throws me off. I just think generally to give the sticky grenade as it is a bit of a leg up, perhaps giving players more control over its usage would help in that department. That's really the main argument here, or the only argument, I suppose. Anyway, moving on. So next up is of course the balanced, which in this case is Poison Point, which I think is a Pokemon ability, but that is, it's inspired by that. But in this case, we are using the poison effect from the explosive chemical bolts on the crossbow, and giving them to the sticky grenade. I sort of like the idea of the sticky grenade. We look at it here. It sticks to enemies, and it does a slight amount of damage when it attaches to them as well, because with these little barbs that it uses to stick into enemies, it stabs them essentially. And I thought, coating those in poison just makes a lot of sense to me. So we have Poison Point, and it poisons enemies while attached to them. And you also get this benefit, which obviously it incurs a small amount of single target damage over time. But because this is the explosive chemical bolts effect, you can actually, if you kill an enemy while they are poisoned by this effect, it will actually produce that poisonous explosion alongside the main explosion. Although I think this is a weaker version of it, that, maybe it could be a full-on version of it, I'm not sure. Either way, the main point is that if you kill an enemy while the grenade is unexploded, it will actually create a more powerful explosion. Which means you don't inherently need the poison effect at all, which includes the damage over time. It's really just about having a more powerful effect if you kill an enemy before the grenade attached to them explodes. To allow for this, though, I've actually added a penalty that is actually positive, which is greatly increased fuse time. Now, I think this actually works as sort of a double-barreled penalty, as in being both a penalty and a positive. Obviously, a lot of overclocks sort of do blur the line as to whether or not they actually have penalties, or at least oftentimes, say for example, something like Mine Layer System, which obviously has very notable penalties, but it really does balance them out to the point where it's still a straight up upgrade. It just works slightly differently from the base Hurricane. Or on the same weapon, we have Salvin Module, which really doesn't have any downsides. It just changes the way the weapon works, but it doesn't actually have any downsides. In this case, I think this still is a downside where you would lose out on this effect, and you would just have an overall much less effective grenade if you failed to kill the enemy. You know, there wouldn't really be much happening if you didn't kill them. In fact, I almost like the idea of the grenade disappearing if you don't kill the enemy. That actually might be a better downside than no explosion fear factor. But obviously, we need to sort of think about implementation aside from it just being an overclock. If it were an overclock, I would say this. Not killed. Before fuse runs out, not before destination. The fuse will run out and the grenade will just disappear, basically. That's as an overclock, though. Might even need to push it up to an unstable overclock. But if this were to be something like an upgrade, obviously, see, this is the kind of idea that could never be added as a base mechanic. You know, you could spin it off into its own grenade, a sort of a poison grenade that uses that effect from the crossbow, which I think would be better suited actually to a throwing knife style melee grenade where you have quite a lot of them, which would suit scout, maybe engineer. But in this case, if it were to be an upgrade for the sticky grenade, I would take away the poison aspect and simply make it so that you wouldn't even have an increased fuse time, actually. It would be a very challenging upgrade to use, but you would have a much more powerful explosion if you were able to kill the enemy the grenade's attached to before the fuse runs out. But you'd have a much, the penalties. The penalties would be is taking up your given upgrade slot, and that you have a really short window to do it. And it would be purely explosive damage as well. In this case, we are using poison damage, which incurs a couple downsides by itself, mainly the fact that it can't affect robots, which I'm not entirely against. I suppose in the context of something like a sticky grenade, corrosion almost makes more sense, but that would make more sense to me as something for the HE grenade, where, say, the HE was coated in corrosion, which allowed it to stick to enemies. So, I sort of sometimes like, mainly doing this in my head. I don't really do this kind of thing out loud or in conversation with Tyler or anything like that. But if I wanted to just throw out a really crazy idea, you could sort of have elemental sort of like dip, like feature. As a feature, you could basically choose to have your grenade coated in corrosion, like, sludge, and have it be like sticky. But then again, that would probably completely invalidate the sticky grenade, especially if you could make sticky clusters and lead bursters and proximity mines. Sticky proximity mines sounds insane. Either way, that's poison point. I hope you see what I'm getting at, and I think there is very small possibility of this being added to the game as it is. Obviously, if we're going up for a pure sort of approach, if I were a purist about these ideas, then it would necessitate a sort of new slew of features to be added to the game to allow for these things. By that I mean them adding grenade upgrades or overclocks, which we don't have. But I'm able to do both. There's the hypothetical, and also the grounding of the ideas as well. Some of these ideas are harder to ground. I think this is one of them, but I still think a version of it exists. The thing is, there isn't a version of this that actually exists that could be added to the base game for the sticky grenade itself. That's why I proposed an entirely new grenade to support this function. So that's sometimes the grounding of one of these ideas you need to take a completely different approach. That's why I'm not being a purist. I'm not saying I want it to be added exactly as it is, because that's not possible in the game's current state. But at the same time, the overall point of the series, which I've explained quite a few times before, is to sort of make a case for giving overclocks and more upgrades, and in this case, upgrades straight up to our tools and tools and grenades, basically. This series is overall a pitch for that feature. So I'd love to see it one day, and I hope these help to make that more attractive of an idea to the people, like the player base and Ghost Ship, if they are in fact watching, which I cannot guarantee that they are, but it's also not entirely impossible that they aren't, or it's not entirely impossible that they are, I should say. Anyway, let's get to the last one. The last one being a wonderful little contraption known as Face Off. Obviously, I've got a little, quote in there. It's about rock, it's about stone. But this takes the idea of attaching grenades to enemies as being the main point. I guess. Not that that's too different from the balanced one, but in this case, I guess if you've read the text by now, which you could have done, attaching a sticky grenade to an enemy weak point will deal increased direct damage and cause a much larger and more powerful explosion. This will apparently it doubles all default stats. I don't know why I've added the radius things there. I probably shouldn't. I don't actually know what that's about. I think I'm just clarifying on the maximum damage radius, but it would double the radius and double the damage and double the fear factor, which doesn't exist now. That's actually fine. Basically, the idea is you get a much more powerful explosion if you hit an enemy's weak point with the grenade itself. If you don't, the grenade is actually weaker, and overall we'd have no fear attached to the grenade at all, but you essentially get something much more powerful. You know, it's almost the firepower of a cluster grenade, or arguably more, and you do have 6 of them if you're able to use them well, which I think is the attraction here. This, in my opinion, could only exist as an upgrade or overclock, possibly even only an overclock. I can barely even envisage like another grenade for this. I guess the other version of it is a grenade launcher overclock, which I would actually love. You could translate this idea onto that. That's the current game state implementation of this. The hypothetical implementation is, to me, exactly as it is here, and it would also do exactly this. You could turn this in. You could actually turn this into a PGL overclock as it is. I would love that. You could actually just change the icon and the name, and change a bit of the flavor text here to hitting an enemy with on the weak point with a grenade. But I don't know really what to say about it, because it's quite an intense idea, and I've explained how it will work and stuff like that. So where I go from here is sort of dubious. Because I'm a big fan of the idea. I just hope it comes across why you might want to use this. I know I would want to use this. Obviously, you would want to focus on certain types of enemies. I'd say in most scenarios, the Praetorian is the one you want to go for, even though its weak point isn't its face, which kind of goes against the name, but that's just the name. But in most contexts, it's going to be the Praetorian, but also Dreadnoughts. That single target damage is not invaluable, given that it's doubling the actual area damage, but also, and I want to look at this quickly, the sticky grenade's direct damage that it deals when you hit something with it. It's 20. So in this case, it would be 40, which isn't a great deal, but you do have that increased explosion damage, ramped up to, well, actually, here's the thing. The sticky grenade deals impact damage, also deals direct explosive damage to the enemy itself, as well as explosion area damage. So we got 20 impact direct damage, we got 90 explosive direct damage, and we got 130 area damage, which actually totals up to, and give me a moment here, 260 plus 180, which is 440 plus, so it's actually 480 damage per grenade to a single target, which would not be nothing against certain bigger enemies. Oppressor would tank it pretty easily, but against other things it would be quite nice. So I think there's not really much debate about the strength of this idea. It's just the validity of it as an idea in general. And I think it would be entirely valid if we lived in a world where we had grenade overclocks. At the same time, as a PGL overclock, I think this is a pretty good idea as well. So you could do that. Although I'm not going to make those adjustments on screen right now. Just use your imagination. But that's really the furthest I can go with it. That was the Overclock workshop for this week on the sticky grenade. Next week will be Driller's first grenade, which is obviously the impact axe, which I've got a couple quite cool ideas for, I think. Maybe I should take more stock in these ideas. I'm really confident about them, as you can tell. No, I still enjoyed doing this series, actually, more than I thought I would. I sort of thought it was going to trail off a little bit, but clearly that isn't the case. Don't know what I'm going to do when it's over, though. That's pretty scary. Probably reworked or something like that. Either way, if you did enjoy, thank you so much. Just thank you for watching in general. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell for all future workshops and build showcases, or just any of the stuff we do in general. I'm going to finish this before I get to 20 minutes, so once again, thanks for watching, and take care, guys. See you next time.